So we are going to resume on about letter 71. And if you didn't download the most updated booklet, you should have, excuse me, 219 pages on the current booklet. But I think this was from last week's version as well. So this letter takes us back a month to the month of Nisan, the month of miracles. That's the month of Pesach. And it has a very important and often repeated message from the Rebbe. The Rebbe used to send out it's called a Michtav Klali, which is a general letter that would be addressed to the Jewish people before different holidays and times of the different seasons of the year. So this letter, it was in the year 1973. To the sons and daughters of our people, Israel, everywhere, God bless you all. Greeting and blessing. This month of Nisan and its central aspect, which is the festival of Pesach, have a special relevance and connection with their Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So the Rebbe is saying that the beginning of this month called Nisan, which was last month, even though it's 15 days before the holiday of Passover beginning, of Pesach beginning, it already has relevance and connection. As is also indicated in the introduction to the month of Nisan and Pesach, Parshas HaChodesh, because we know that the Shabbos before the month of Nisan, we read a special Torah reading after the weekly Torah portion, called Parshas HaChodesh, which is the reading where God instructs the Jewish people instructed Moshe to follow the lunar cycle, and God instructed that to Moshe when we were still in Egypt, 15 days before we got out of Egypt. And then that's when God also told Moshe to tell all the Jewish people to take a lamb, because they're going to need to slaughter it as a Paschal lamb and put the blood on their doorposts, etc. Which is Parshas HaChodesh, which is read in the Torah on the Shabbos preceding Rosh Chodesh Nisan, or on the Shabbos of Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So we already see that the beginning of the month is directly associated with the event of Passover. The entire parsha, the entire Torah portion of that Shabbos, we call Parshas HaChodesh, although HaChodesh is only the beginning of the second verse. So this specific reading that we do after the weekly Torah portion is called Parshas HaChodesh, the portion of HaChodesh, even though the word HaChodesh is in the second verse of the reading, not in the first verse of the reading. While the content of the Parsha has rather to do with the Korban Pesach and the festival of Pesach and the laws. And when you read the entire reading, the Rebbe is observing, it's primarily focused on the Paschal lamb and the holiday of Pesach, not eating chametz and only eating matzah. It only speaks very briefly in the beginning about about observing a month based on the lunar cycle. Hence, it is clear that the content of the said verse is not simply a preface to the subject of Passover, of Pesach, but has a special connection to it. So the Rebbe is observing that if we're still calling it the name of this reading, the month, HaChodesh, which means the month, instead of calling it Pesach, which is the primary focus of the reading, that must be because the preface to the main subject, the preface being the following the lunar cycle, versus the main subject, which is Pesach, it must be that it's not simply a preface, but it actually has a very strong connection to the whole theme of Pesach. The question, therefore, is, wherein lies the connection between this month shall be unto you, the head of the months? And let me explain actually the idea that the Rebbe is focusing on here. So when God told Moshe to follow the lunar cycle, he said, HaChodesh hazel lachem rosh chadashim. This month, the month of Nisan, should be the head of all of the months. Which means that whenever you count months, always begin the counting with the month of Nisan as month number one. Now that's very odd, and I'm going to just preface what the Rebbe is going to be saying so it'll be easier to understand. The reason why that's very odd is because we know that the Jewish New Year begins in the month of Tishrei, which is in our seasons around September time, right? It's actually 6 months. It's exactly a half a year away from the new year, which it begins in September time, called Tishrei. The month of Tishrei begins exactly 6 months after the month of Nisan, which is the month of Pesach. Yet God says, even though we count our years from Tishrei, count the months from Nisan. So we do something very unusual. In the secular world, if you ask someone when is New Year's, they're going to say January 1st. You ask them what's the first month of the year, they're going to say January, which is correct. In Judaism, if we were to use the secular calendar, we would say the beginning of the year is January, New Year begins in January, and the first month is July. That would be the equivalent. Why would you have a different cycle for months than you do for years? That's what the Rebbe is getting to over here. So the Rebbe says that the question therefore is, wherein lies the connection between this month shall be unto you the head of the months? It is first unto you of the month of the year. In other words, the counting of the months of the year from the month of Nisan and the matters pertaining to Pesach. So what is the association between the preface of this Torah reading, which tells us to count the months, beginning with the month of Nisan? How is that associated with the holiday of Pesach? Moreover, if every matter of Torah has profound meaning, it is certain that a matter relating to Pesach, the liberation from Egypt, which are a great foundation and strong pillar of our Torah and faith, the Rebbe is quoting, contains a particularly far-reaching and comprehensive significance. We know that everything in the Torah has profound meaning, that it must be that this matter that relates to Pesach, right, must be very significant. So now the Rebbe begins to explain that the Jewish calendar, how are we doing, everyone? We're okay so far? I know this is a little bit more academic, but it's going to come with a powerful, fundamental lesson for all of us in our lives. So, just a moment. Okay. So the Rebbe continues. The Jewish annual calendar derived from the Torah is characterized by having two general orders. So now the Rebbe is saying what I prefaced to make it a little bit easier. There's the order of the beginning of the year from the first of Tishrei, called Rosh Hashanah. So we have two different orders or two different countings that we do in Judaism. One is the counting of the years, and the counting of the years begins with the month of Tishrei, which that month is Rosh Hashanah, the first of the year. And then we have the order of the beginning of the months, not the beginning of the year, but the beginning of the months, with this month, meaning the month of Nisan, the month of Pesach, being the first of all the months. To begin the calendar year with Tishrei is understandable. Why? It is the anniversary of the creation of the world. So we begin the counting of years on the day that God created the world, the anniversary of the creation of the world, and also corresponds to the course of nature ordered by the Creator. When God created the world, what did God create? What is the world? So again, I'm going to remind you, you may know this already from other things I've shared, that the word for world in Hebrew is olam. You may have heard of organizations called Olami, which means my world. Olam is world, okay? And the reason why the world is called Olam in Hebrew is because the word Olam in Hebrew has in its root the word He'elam, which means hidden. The world essentially, like if you ask someone on the street, what is the world? They'll say, what do you mean the world? The world is our universe, right? And the world is much deeper than that. The world is an environment where the divine is hidden. And that's why in Hebrew, the word olam, which means world, also means to hide. Because the purpose, the fabric of the world ultimately is, the concept of God creating this physical world is that, and all the worlds, by the way, is that they hide the presence of God. And that's the reason why when God creates the world, what does he create? He creates something called nature. Nature is the order within which, a design within which the world operates. What does a design that operates the same way all the time do? It hides the source that's making it get done. It just looks what we call natural. It just looks natural, right? If you were to ask someone, why is it that when you plant a seed in the ground, something sprouts from the ground? What do we answer? It's nature. We say it's nature. Why? Because it's nature. But nature is not an explanation. What do you mean it's nature? What's nature? Right? So nature actually is the divine hidden in a pattern. When God hides himself in a pattern, we call it nature. And if you want to get more sophisticated, you call it Mother Nature. And if you want to get more sophisticated, you call it the universe, because we may be scared to use this terrifying word called God. But it actually is God. Now, so Tishrei is when we commemorate the creation of the world, which is the hiddenness of God, which is the creation of nature, and that's the natural order of things. So, and so the Rebbe says, and also corresponds to the course of nature ordered by the Creator, sowing and reaping, namely plowing and sowing in Tishrei. And later in Nisan begins the time of the first harvest, at least in Israel it is, of barley, and subsequently around Shavuos, the wheat harvest and so forth. Nature, there's an order to things. In contrast to the above, the commandment in the Torah requiring our Jewish people to count the months from Nisan, the fact that even though we count years from Tishrei, we count months from 6 months later, the month of Nisan, emphasizes the miraculous, supernatural order that governing life, as clearly indicated in this Torah reading by linking the subject of Nisan as the first of the months of the subject of with the subject of Pesach, because we know that Pesach and Yitzias Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, were miracles and wonders completely above the natural course of nature. So the reason why we start the reason why we start this whole Torah reading that speaks about Passover and Exodus from Egypt with the subject of the counting of the months is to say that the reason why we have a special order for the counting of the months is because this order is an order that follows the supernatural, as opposed to the order of years, which follows nature. And this is very, very powerful, by the way, because it reminds us that there are two orders that are playing out at the same time all the time. There's nature, and underlaying nature is supernatural. And really, nature is just a disguise. The real order is the supernatural. So both orders, the natural and supernatural, are at work in the world. The teaching of Parshat HaChodesh, making Nisan the first of all the months, is that a Jew must realize the truth. Even when he can see with his eyes only a natural course of events, he will, if he will look deeply, realize and perceive that in truth everything is conducted by hashgacha pratis, divine providence in every detail, and in a miraculous way, so that even such a natural thing as sowing and reaping barley and wheat is not the result of my strength and the power of my hand, but the product of plowing and planting the field half a year earlier. But I'm sorry, is not the result of my strength and the power of my hand, the product of plowing and planting the field a half a year earlier. But it is the result of the blessing of God, is that which enriches. He's quoting something here. Birchas Hashem hitashir, the blessing of God is that which enriches. And this was shown to all Jews without exception, following their liberation from Egypt, and when they all received their daily bread in the form of the heavenly manna. And later, upon entering the inhabited land, the land of Israel, likewise in Nisan, they found fields and orchards ripe for reaping. In other words, let me put this into maybe a way that we can really relate to this. And this is an enormous, enormous challenge, which is incumbent upon each and every one of us to take. And that's the way we see what we experience in life. If I truly believe, okay, when I say truly believe, I mean when I consciously believe. Our souls always believe. But if I truly consciously believe that all of my livelihood comes from God, then if there's a setback in my business, what is my emotional state? It's not worry, right? Let's say I approach a potential client and the meeting does not go well. Am I worried? No. Why not? Because I am clear that my livelihood doesn't come from this client. My livelihood comes from God. And God has an infinite number of ways of sending me my livelihood. So this is just, the way it's playing out, the way God's playing it out. If I believe that I depend on this client in order to make X amount of dollars, then when the client I'm having trouble getting the deal through, then I get very worried. Why? Because I associate my success with dependency on this client, not dependency on God. Now, this is we're talking a high level game of faith here now, like the real deal faith, right? And where we challenge ourselves to say, well, what do I really believe, right? And the way we reorient ourselves, say, why am I so worried? Maybe I shouldn't be so worried, right? If God, in fact, controls things. When I go to when someone goes to the doctor, God forbid, and God forbid the doctor gives a bad prognosis, right, or whatever it may be, and then the doctor says something doctor's not authorized to say. They give you a time frame, right? So most people get gripped with terror because the doctor knows, but the doctor doesn't know. Only God knows, and only God decides. So if I really have faith in God, I do not live in the world of nature. I live in the world of the supernatural, in the world of God. Manna falls from heaven, and people who have a prognosis that they can only live for 6 weeks, right? Live for 6 years. And there are more than enough stories to prove this, even. Right? But the question is, where's our state of consciousness? That is the challenge here. And that's what the Rebbe is saying is the lesson of reading the opening up the story of Exodus and Matzah and leaving Egypt and Passover with the month of Nisan, with the fact that the month of Nisan is the beginning of all of the counting of months, because a Jew has to live on the cycle of the supernatural. That means the cycle of God, the divine, not nature. Okay, so let's continue the letter now. Unless someone has a question or objection. Okay, I guess we're good. So, at first glance, it may appear that what has been said above is at variance with the principle of man to toil is born, since after all, the essential thing is not man's toil, but God's blessing. So now that I was going to address one of the biggest challenges, at least that I have in concretely internalizing this balance. And it's the balance between the fact that we know that if I don't go out to earn a living, I will not make a living. I cannot sit at home and say, everything comes from God. God, I'm waiting for the paycheck. I'm waiting for the manna. Right? Now, one can ask themselves, why not? Right? Why not? If, in fact, our blessings come from God, let them come from God. Why, in fact, do I have to work? And the challenge with going to work is that the moment I start putting in effort to work, I begin to naturally think, because it seems like A plus B equals C, that I put in this effort, I got a result, I deserve a pat on the back. I achieved this. It's very hard to experience that I put forth effort, but I don't get the credit, right? People are very sensitive to these things, right? Why didn't you acknowledge me? Right? We're very sensitive to this, right? And this is the challenge, because ultimately, as we're going to see in a moment, What God tells us to do is to put in the effort and to always remember that the results are not ours. Now it doesn't, in the physical world, that doesn't correlate. So we need a tremendous amount of inner development to start internalizing that and actually being clear about that. I put forth this effort, and it was God's blessings through my effort that made this successful. There are plenty of efforts I've put forth that were not successful. There's no guarantee it will be successful. It was only successful. And that would mean that a farmer would know that even though every year I plant, and relatively speaking, my crops come up, some years better, some years worse, but overall it grows, that it's not the seeds and it's not the plowing. That's just me creating, as we would say in Hasidic language, creating the vessel to receive God's blessing. But anything that grows is the miraculous hand of God. Now, the blessing of this, I'm ranting a little bit over here. I hope that's okay. The blessing of this is that we begin to live entirely with the infinite. We live in a completely different realm as we can get into this more and more. We're living in a realm that's entirely the divine. It's not a human place, and it's a very expansive place. It's an amazing place to live. It's a hard place to get to, but we all get there slowly if we work on it. And then we are not victims of any type of circumstance, and we're not victims of any limits of the universe, because we don't live in those limitations. We live with God. So, but back to the letter. But apart from the fact that this too is a divine directive in Torah. So the first thing the Rebbe says is, do you know why a man has to go out to work every day? Because this is a divine directive. I'm going to go back to something else I think I said in one of our earlier classes. Lahavdil, the Christian scientists, they believe that we believe in God. So when we're sick, we don't take medicine. God's going to heal us, right? Now, are they right or are they wrong? So most people will say they're crazy. You got to be crazy, right? God forbid. I mean, and there are people who have been tried in the court of law in America because they had a child who had, God forbid, cancer or something, and they didn't bring the child in for treatment. So what would we say? They're crazy. Why are they crazy? Are they crazy because we believe that medicine heals people? That's not the reason why they're crazy, by the way. Their general approach is actually very correct, and that is that Hashem, God, is the one who heals. The mistake that they make is one thing, that God happened to have told us that we should use nature, the avenues of nature, to receive the blessings of God. So on one hand, we're supposed to use the avenues of nature. On the other hand, we have to be clear that that's not what's bringing us the results that we're getting. So to continue, but apart from the fact that this too is a divine directive in Torah, namely, one should not rely on a miracle. It has already been explained in the previous letter that toil connotes a variety of types and levels. Thus, for example, man's toil in the weekdays is different from his toil on the day of Shabbos, when his activity must be directed to spiritual matters. Moreover, even in the matter of toil, in the plain sense of the word, such as in plowing or planting in their season, and so forth, man's toil only provides the natural garments, concealing the supernatural order, and the vessels for the divine blessing. But he must realize and remember that the blessing comes from God. Let me give you another example, just that I came up from reading the actual text. Let's say, sometimes people come over to me and they say, Rabbi, I want to give a donation, right? Can I give it to you today? Sometimes they know enough to ask that question, but it's on Shabbos and they have an envelope with them and they want to give me a check, right? I happen to like money, just like you, right? Money helps us. Money gets us places, right? What do I tell them? I can't take it today, right? But Rabbi, it's a $25,000 check. It really doesn't make a difference, right? It could be $1 million check. It really won't make one bit of a difference, right? A client calls us an emergency on Shabbos, right? It's a big client. It's our biggest client. When I'm using this as ways for us to assess ourselves. When I know that my blessings come from God, then I know that this is not something I can deal with. When I believe that my blessings come from my effort, then it's something I might deal with, right? So there are different scenarios that begin to give us the ability to assess ourselves. And I find that to be very valuable always, to have that self-awareness. So, oh, well, why did I do that? Do I believe or don't I believe, right? And of course, it's not so black and white. It can be very gray, but the truth is black and white. But sometimes we get very confused, or we're just challenged, because a large sum of money can really confuse someone. So these are different ways of us looking at things. And it's also that, of course, the Rebbe's objective here is to liberate us from Egypt. What does that mean? Egypt means constraints in Hebrew. The word Mitzrayim, the Hebrew word for Egypt, means constraints. The Rebbe is encouraging us to liberate ourselves from Egypt, which means not to be constrained by nature. Guess what? You don't have to respond to this person. Not that you don't have to. You should not respond to this person on Shabbos and wait till after Shabbos. And as we say in English, the chips will fall where they may. God is the one who determines what you're going to make. And just be with God. Be with God. Right? And this is a big challenge that we have to challenge ourselves, each and every one of us, including myself, in our own circumstances. There were times when Jews saw revealed miracles, such as the miracles that occurred daily in the Beis Hamikdash, in the temple. In the temple, they saw miracles happening every single day because certain things operated in a miraculous fashion. So it was miraculous. But even in the present day of Galus, of exile, when the world is engulfed in darkness and miracles are not in evidence to the physical eye, it is only because the person to whom a miracle occurs does not recognize his miracle. It's a saying in Hebrew. All these quotations are quotes in Hebrew, beautiful quotes in Hebrew. It says, Ein balanes maker, the one who experiences a miracle does not recognize his own miracle. We live in such darkness today that a miracle will happen to us, and we won't even know that a miracle happened. Why not? Because we'll call it nature. We'll say, oh, it worked out. Like the famous joke about the guy who tells God he needs that parking spot right up front because he's running very late. He has an important meeting. And please open up the parking spot. And if you do, I'm going to light Shabbos candles every Friday. I'm going to keep kosher. I'm going to be the most religious person in the world. And then, lo and behold, they pull into the parking lot, and there's a parking spot open right in front. They pull and say, God, never mind, I found one myself. So that is exactly this quote, that the person who had the miracle doesn't even realize that it was a miracle. As our sages of blessed memory declare, but every person, especially a Jew, if he should think deeply about all that has happened to him in the course of any period of time, would perceive the hashgacha pratis, he would perceive the divine providence, the divine hand, indeed miraculous divine intervention that has guided his destiny. If we all pay close attention, I was on Shabbos, this subject came up that the Rebbe had this campaign of that on major holidays that the Hasidim that his followers should on the holidays we don't drive, we walk. So he would tell them, I want you to go to synagogues all over New York and share a Hasidic message in different synagogues. So this Hasidim, and I did this myself. We used to walk an hour, 2 hours to a synagogue. We used to talk, we used to dance, brings the happiness of the holiday, and then we would walk back to Crown Heights. It was a big undertaking, right? Now, when I was 20 years old, and I was in my last year of rabbinical college in Brooklyn, then I did a 2-year stint after that. So I used to go with a friend of mine, very good friend of mine. We used to walk for 45 minutes every single Shabbos afternoon to a little synagogue about 45 minutes away from Crown Heights, where I would share a Torah thought for about 10 minutes to about 11 and a half men. The average age was over 80, and I think maybe 2.5 of them were able to hear what I was saying. And I used to spend the whole 45 minutes reviewing it like I was giving the State of the Union, because I was so nervous. But I would do this every week. Why? Because this is what the Rebbe wanted, right? And actually, many students didn't do this. But so happened I did this with a friend, we were a class of 60. I don't know how many of us did it, but a few of us did it, and I did this with a friend of mine. I had no idea what I was developing in doing that. I had no idea whatsoever. I could not have possibly known, right? That I'd be spending my life, right, teaching. And so this was the divine providence, divine intervention, arranging that I should be doing something, giving me this enormous opportunity that will set things up for me later in life. So there's just one little example of an endless number of things where we can see the hand of God. This, therefore, is the general guiding principle contained in the message of this month shall be unto you the head of the months. When Jews are on the threshold of Yitzias Mitzrayim, exodus from Egypt, and about to begin a new life, both collectively and individually, we are told by God, for you there is a new order. You count the months of the year pointedly from Nisan. Here in the Torah Semis, the Torah of truth, Torah Chaim, the Torah of life, because it's our true guide in our daily life, teaches us what is the true concept and Jewish idea of the world order. To see the hand of divine providence, of Hashgacha Pratis, and supernatural direction, even when it is concealed in natural trappings. That we should not get fooled by the natural trappings, by the trappings of nature, but should still see the hand of God in everything. The same idea has often been referred to by King David in the Psalms, which he, as the sweetener of the songs of Israel, intoned for, and in behalf of all Jews in all generations. One of them is the Psalm, in you, O God, do I put my trust. Not occasionally, but always, every day. And therefore I shall not be ashamed. Such trust in God brings forth his miraculous intervention. If you want to know what brings forth God's miraculous intervention, it is us showing our trust in God. And so such trust in God brings forth his miraculous intervention in a manifest way. So much so that all such things that might have impeded the proper life, and Torah and mitzvahs in particular, not only become ineffective, but reverse themselves to aid in the good and to promote the right kind of life, as indicated in the conclusion of the said psalm. Also my tongue shall talk of your benevolence all day long, for shamed and confounded are they who seek my hurt. Essentially what the Rebbe is saying is this, that when we do things which will seem to impede on a successful life, so why are we doing it? Because God tells us to do it. Namely, what's the Rebbe says, what are we talking about? Torah and mitzvahs in particular. Like God says, don't work on Shabbos. What do you mean? You want me to shut down a retail business on Shabbos? Right? The Rebbe says, don't do that, right? God says, don't do that. Or many of the other things, not to eat certain foods, right? So even though these are things that apparently in the world of nature will impede on success, we will see that by doing them, not only will not be ineffective, but it will reverse itself, and this will become the source of our blessings. And really, that is the great secret of the Jewish people throughout our history. That we operated on a different level, in a completely different way, on a divine platform, and here we are as miraculous people. And just for the sake of spelling this out very explicitly, when Jews tragically have chosen not to It was just a matter of maybe 3 generations where tragically they have been swallowed up by the rest of the world. All those individuals and things, continuing the letter, all those individuals and things which at first, far from being favorable, even sought to be harmful. Eventually, so all those things which not only were not favorable to serving our interest, but they were harmful, eventually became not only impotent and dissipated, but ashamed and remorseful for their previous attitude. So all those individuals and things, people and things, right, that did otherwise had remorse, because with time we see actually how things play out. But as I often say, one of the great secrets of a successful life is not to wait until I see things play out, because then it's way too late, but to have the faith and live it even before I know it so clearly, so that I have all of the benefits of having lived it even before I knew it. So maybe God's will that the month of Nisan and the month of Geula, of liberation, should bring each and every one liberation and freedom from all the mitzirim and mitzarim, all of the limitations, distresses, and limitations, as a proper prelude to Chag HaMatzos, the festival of our liberation. With esteem and blessing, very kosher and joyous Pesach. I see we have a comment. My husband Zal had Lubavitch boys walk to our synagogue in Bensonhurst on Shabbos. He would send them back with a car service after Shabbos. Yes, exactly so. That was exactly the program that I was involved with. And I wonder if I was ever in that synagogue, Bonnie. I think I may have discussed this with you, because I did go. There was a Sephardic synagogue that I went to sometimes. That wasn't the main synagogue I went to on a weekly basis, but there were sometimes I went with another friend to this Sephardic synagogue. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, how are we doing, everyone? Any other questions or comments? This was a deep concept. I guess we're all good. Okay. Letter 72, guidance from the most qualified dietitian. Okay. To a Mrs. in the year 1975 in University Heights, Ohio. Blessing and greeting. I duly received your letter and will remember you in prayer for the fulfillment of your heart's desires for good. On the basis of your writing, it is surely unnecessary to emphasize to you at length the importance of Yiddishkeit as a continuous daily experience, not as some misconceived persons may think, that it is sufficient to observe it on exceptional occasions or special days. The Rebbe says that Yiddishkeit is meant to be lived daily, not just on holidays. For as is written, the Torah and the mitzvahs are our life and the length of our days. Obviously, life must be continuous and cannot be reserved for exceptional occasions or special days. So it is with the life-giving Torah and the mitzvah which the Torah instructs us to observe every day. No doubt, you have had the occasion to discuss this topic with our mutual friends in your community. I'm assuming these are the Rebbe's shluchim in that community. And will also do so in the future. Hence, there is no need to say any more on this, although the subject matter certainly warrants a great deal more to be said about observing Yiddishkeit daily. I would like to dwell, however, on a point mentioned at the conclusion of your letter, namely in reference to kashrus, to keeping kosher. It has always been known, and it has been particularly emphasized lately, that the diet is very important for the general state of health, as well as the emotional life. Many books and articles have been and are being written on this subject by experts and physicians who have dedicated their life to this subject. It is now universally believed and accepted that in the area of eating and drinking, a human being cannot just follow his desires and temptations, but must learn to regulate his habits. And this is what the experts and dietitians try to do, namely to prescribe the right diet of foods and beverages for persons in accordance with their type of activity and environment. As usual, wherever there is a human research, there is always something new from time to time. And very often, the latest findings invalidate previous ones. I was bringing out a very important point here about what I'm going to call the science. And that is that as great as science is, which it is great, in their discovery of many different things that we all benefit from, probably more than we'll ever realize. At the same time, it is far from having reached, we'll say, the truth, right? The absolute truth, right? Because it's continuously updating itself. So it's doing better and better and better. So we can benefit from it, even though it hasn't figured everything out fully, but it still serves us. And it serves us more and more and more as we can continuously update things. And that is the trajectory of science. We all know that the theories of today are going to be outdated in 100 years. However, laymen can only follow the advice of the experts as long as they are trustworthy. And he accepts the restrictions they impose and accept them willingly and readily, and even pays for their advice and so on. Wait, did I just skip? I think I did. 1 second. There's always something from time to time. Right. Though it is assumed that in due course the latest may similarly be invalidated. However, right, laymen can only follow the advice of the experts as long as they are trustworthy. So in other words, even though the experts are not perfect and they're not getting to the very essence of the truth, but they're trustworthy, and he accepts the restrictions they impose and accepts them willingly and readily, and even pays for their advice and so on. Needless to say, this is as it should be, since not everyone has the time and capacity to do research to find out what is good for him physically and spiritually. In light of the above, how grateful a Jew must be to God, the creator of the world and the essence of perfection, who is certainly trustworthy. For his directives in this field, by giving us our dietary laws, the laws of Kosher, which ensure our good, healthy our health physically, mentally, and spiritually. So the Rebbe is saying, if we're going to trust dietitians and scientists who study the subject and understand it, and we take their advice, how grateful must we be that Almighty God, the creator of the universe, gave us dietary advice. Moreover, these are laws and regulations which we can carry out with relative ease. It follows, therefore, that knowing this, a Jew should not rest, but should try his very utmost to make other Jews in his environment aware of this important and vital aspect of the daily life and encourage them to order their life accordingly. One of the most effective ways of influence is to show a living example. But inasmuch as other people do not always emulate the example 100%, thinking that for them it would suffice to follow it up to a halfway or so, the Rebbe makes a point here like we had last week, the example must be on a much higher level in order to make allowances for human nature. That means your observance of kosher should be so high that even someone who says, I don't need to do it on that level, they're still doing it in full compliance with the laws of kosher. May God grant that just as you wrote your letter, so you should have good news to report in regard to its content. I'm going to add to this that, because the Rebbe makes his point that it's relatively easy to keep kosher. If that was ever true, it's even more true today. So I would say this, that at the very outset, minimally, we can make sure when we go to shop for food that most foods that we buy have a kosher option. I would say most foods today have a kosher option. So if we're buying ketchup and mustard, we can buy the one that's kosher, right? If we're buying pasta, we can buy the one that has the kosher certification. So just like that, already we're increasing the amount of kosher that we're eating significantly. And then, of course, slowly we shift to making sure we only eat foods which are kosher, right? And that could be even before we separate our dishes, or we this or that, or kosherize our whole kitchen. Like there are different levels that we can get to in doing this more and more and more. And you take it a step at a time until we get to the complete healthy diet, which most dietitians would encourage anyway, because most people who make drastic changes do not sustain them. That's one of the great challenges of diets in general anyway. Okay, we're good? Next letter. When kosher food doesn't taste as good. Okay. So many times, I know this from, different affairs, that people sometimes don't want to get a kosher caterer because the food's not as good. They're embarrassed in front of their guests, etc. I can't comment on that because I never tasted food that wasn't kosher because I was raised in a kosher home. Um, and that could very well be the case. I don't know. Uh, there is very good kosher food too, as well. I don't know if it matches. I would hope it does, and I think it does. But the Rebbe addresses this. So, to a doctor in California, what's SR California? Anyone know?
Santa Rosa.
Oh, yeah, maybe. Very good. Very good. Yeah. Okay. So, greeting and blessing. This is from the year 1979. I am a receipt of your letter on the 17th of Tammuz with the enclosure. If you will let me know the Jewish names together with the mother's Jewish names, as is customary of all those for whom you request a blessing, I will remember all in prayer. It is surely unnecessary to emphasize to you at length that since all blessings come from God, and the channel to receive them is through the daily life and conduct in accordance with God's will, namely in accordance with the Torah and mitzvos, every additional effort in matters of Yiddishkeit is bound to widen the channels to receive God's blessings. So Rebbe says any effort a Jew makes to expand their involvement in Torah, their adherence to Torah and mitzvahs, will widen the channels of blessing. So anything we do, that's what God wants, is going to open up, broaden the channels for God's blessing to flow into our life. And since, as I note from your writing, you have made considerable strides in this direction, it should be easier to go from strength to strength. With reference to the matter of kashrus, of kosher, which you mention, in particular in connection with the assertion that kosher meat available in your area does not taste as good, I trust you will be able to find the proper words to explain, especially since you are a doctor, that the proper food has a direct effect not only on physical health, but also on such matters as moods, nerves, thinking, etc., although the latter effects are often more subtle and hidden. This should be obvious also to common sense, inasmuch as the food one consumes becomes assimilated by the body and is directly linked to its physical and mental capacities, as has also been confirmed by medical science. So we know that the food has a direct impact on many areas of our life. So now the matter of taste is linked with the palate and is a very short duration. So the taste, it has to do with only your palate, that's it. And it's just a matter of a few seconds, maybe a few minutes. Of course, whereas the consumption of a wholesome and nourishing food is, of course, of lasting vital importance. You know, I always refer to green juices by way of example. People, I don't know how you drink that, but somehow people drink it because it's healthy when they know that it has all of the nutrients that it has, so then they're inspired to drink it. So so perspective is very powerful in our life. When we have perspective that what the power of kosher food to my entire the expression of my soul within my body, what it does for my soul within my body. So that automatically changes the way we experience food that doesn't taste as good. That's the point the Rebbe is making. Insofar as the Jew is concerned, our Torah's Chaim, given by the Creator and Master of the universe, is quite specific as to what a Jew may or may not eat, and only that which is permissible is truly wholesome and nourishing. It cannot be that something that God tells us not to eat can be wholesome and nourishing for us. And as in the case of all God's mitzvahs, they have been given to us not for God's benefit, but for our own benefit. And not only for our benefit in afterlife, but also in this life on earth, the blessings we receive as we're living life. In view of the above, surely indulgence in taste is of little consideration in comparison to the vital importance of observing the Jewish dietary laws in the everyday life. Receipt is enclosed for your tzedakah, and may the schus of it stand for you and yours in good stead. We're doing okay, everyone? Okay. Next letter. A Jewish sports organization that plays on Shabbos. What does the Rebbe have to say about this? What do you think the Rebbe is going to say? Can anyone guess? So you may say, well, he's going to say you shouldn't do it, right? The Rebbe is not going to say it that way. The Rebbe never says something that way, right? the Rebbe's going to explain on a very grounded and concrete way how a person can understand why it's not a wise thing to do. Okay? Mr. Abraham Fagelin, Victoria, Australia. Care of Mount Scopus War Memorial College. Sounds prestigious. Greeting and blessing. I am in receipt of your letter of July 12th, in which you write about the problem of. Now, I just want to say, from my knowledge, that there was a Fagelin family who were a Chabad family in Australia from the 1800s, I believe they were. I once read about them. And I would guess that this man, who is probably, so this man, and it's from the way the question is coming, it seems like that he is from this family who the Rebbe, who wrote a letter to the Rebbe about this issue. So he writes, I'm in receipt of a letter on July 12th in which you write about the problem of a Jewish sporting organization which conducts matches and games on Shabbos, requesting permission to use the athletic grounds of the college for sports activities on Sunday, which you refused. You ask my opinion whether you acted in accordance with the Jewish law of refusing them to use the grounds of the college on Sunday because they also have hold games on Shabbos. It's an interesting thing here, interesting scenario. Needless to say, you were completely in the right because of all the reasons you mentioned, which we are not privy to. The essential reason, however, this is where the Rebbe's brilliance always is, getting to the essence of the matter. The essential reason, however, is that a school which is an institution educating and bringing up Jewish children and instilling into them a certain outlook and way of life must always be consistent in its program and method in conformity with the teaching of our Torah, the law of life. The Rebbe is basically saying something very simple. If a school is teaching children about God and about the Torah, and then they contradict the Torah in the way they conduct themselves, then you are weakening everything you're teaching the children because you're contradicting it. Right? It's one thing if there are families sending their kids to the school who are not, who don't follow different things in the Torah. But for the school itself who's teaching these ideas to then contradict these ideas, that's a very big problem. Although our sages have told us not to weigh the respective importance and stringency of the various laws of our Torah, so there's a Mishnah which teaches that you shouldn't, that every law of Torah every mitzvah is a significant mitzvah, and don't start measuring which ones are more important than the others, all of which have to be fulfilled with equal devotion. Nevertheless, there are certain commandments which are more stringent, and among them especially that of Shabbos observance. To keep the Shabbos holy is one of the 10 commandments. And our sages said that it balances in importance all the other commandments put together. From the above, it is clear that a Jewish organization which officially and publicly desecrates the Shabbos, you have a Jewish organization and it publicly desecrates the Shabbos, particularly a youth organization, and more so, when such desecration is motivated only by pleasure, not having even the mistaken justification based on the problem of a livelihood, and is nothing but a wanton desecration of the Torah and the 10 Commandments. Such an organization has no claim whatsoever on the cooperation and support of a Jewish educational institution. So the Rebbe is saying that you, as a Jewish educational institution, should not be supporting such an organization, because they are without any even justification, which the justification will also be mistaken. But they don't even have a justification, it's purely for our enjoyment. Moreover, were the college to accede to the request of the said organization, it would amount to giving the stamp of approval by you of the policy of the said organization. If you were to agree to let them use the college, you would be really supporting what they're doing. In such a case, the students of your school would certainly be influenced by and drawn closer to the said sport organization, and the harm to them would be far-reaching and irreparable. By the same token, your refusal to go along with the request of the said organization represents a justified and impressive protest against this public Shabbos desecration, which protest has an invaluable educational effect, not only on the students of your school, but also to the entire community of Melbourne, Australia, and far beyond. From the above, it is also clear that there's no basis for the argument that it would be better for the children to be connected with this organization during the Shabbos, rather than be spread all over the city without supervision and without a guarantee that they do not engage in undesirable activities, perhaps in non-Jewish clubs. Apart from the cardinal difference between the public desecration of Shabbos, which is officially sanctioned by the school and the Board of Education on the one hand, and the individual conduct of children on the other. So 1 second, let me back up over here. So the Rebbe is saying that one can argue, well, at least they're all gathered together and we know what they're doing, versus they're all going to be home. We won't even know what they're doing. Who knows? They may be doing much worse things. So the Rebbe says that's not a justification at all. On the other end, there's also the difference that in the case of the children who are not under the school supervision, it is to be hoped that only a minority of them do not conduct themselves as desired, and that even these may someday be organized so as to spend the Shabbos in a desirable way. Whereas if official sanction be given to the children's participation in the said sport group, contrary to the code of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch, it would be wrong, which cannot be righted. It would be a wrong which cannot be righted, which will also undermine the prestige of the school. The Rebbe is saying like this: if a child is raised and their institutions are telling them we cannot play on Shabbos, and they at home go do whatever they do on Shabbos, they don't observe Shabbos, but they know right from wrong. So hopefully at some point in their life, they're going to embrace what is right. But if we as an official organization sanction the violation of Shabbos, then that child will always think violation of Shabbos is fine. It's sanctioned. It's totally fine. Our Jewish organizations live that way. And they will never even consider becoming Shabbos observant. By the way, this point would apply to different movements, which shall remain nameless right now, for different movements in Judaism that have done this, quote unquote, for the sake of saving Jewry. And as I've stated in our other discussions, time has already shown very, very clearly that not only have they not saved Jewry, but Jewry is being assimilated through them. One more point. So, and this is the point that the Rebbe makes at different times, and I'm going to emphasize, and that is, and this is important also for us to convey to our, to ourselves and family members, about things that we do not yet observe. And that is even though we don't observe something, we should make it clear that this is something that a Jew should ideally observe. We're not there yet. That's being able to distinguish between where I'm at and what is right. But the moment someone justifies what is right, then we have no barometer anymore. We have no measure of right, because we're compromising our values. Never compromise values, even though I don't live by those values yet. That's fine. Life is a process. But I still have to always acknowledge what the values are. Otherwise, I don't even have a system to follow. That's why when movements compromise the very values of Judaism, that is the destruction of Judaism. I know I'm using harsh words, but I want to say it clearly. One more point, the Rebbe says, experience has shown that in our days, the young people cannot understand any policy of compromise and concession. We live in a time, and the Rebbe is writing this in 1970, this letter, I didn't even say what it was. This letter is from 1957. Right? The Rebbe wrote this in 1957. But this is still true today. There's something unique about our generation. And I say our generation, the generation of our children. Our children do not tolerate inconsistency. They do not tolerate lack of integrity. So they would rather hear the truth that they may not be up to taking on versus seeing hypocrisy. Right? And I'm going to define hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is not when we don't live up to our values. Hypocrisy is when we justify our values to align with our behavior. Right? I can say, yes, that's our ideal, these are our values, and unfortunately I'm not there yet. That's not a hypocrite. That's a person who's growing in life. A hypocrite is someone who actually justifies the value to say why now it's permitted. That's real hypocrisy. And our children have no tolerance for that. So we can tell our children, that we have a certain value, that ideally, as Jews, God tells us we should observe X, Y, and Z. As a family, we're not there yet, right? But we're striving towards that, etc., etc. And we have to make sure we're moving in the right direction. So one more point, experience has shown that in our days, the young people cannot understand any policy of compromise and concession. They ask the simple question: if you can make compromises and concessions in one section of the Torah, by what right do you expect us to follow and conform to the other parts of the Torah? You want to justify what you want to, we'll justify what we want to, which basically means that there's no value system that we have. This is a logical question for either or. Either the Torah is divine and God-given, in which case man has no jurisdiction, which his limited yardstick to choose as to what parts to accept and what to reject. Or if man is the ultimate judge as to what to accept and what to reject in our religion, then it means that the religion is man-made. Hence, by what right can one human being impose his ideas and will on another human being, since every human being is subject to error and fallacy? That is why concessions and compromises are so dangerous nowadays, even more than in bygone days, especially concessions and compromises which go to the very root and foundation of our religion, namely the Holy Shabbos, and directly affect Jewish children and youth in the process of education in their formative years. It's even more dangerous, and which can only lead to progressive deterioration, conservatism, reform, and eventually to complete assimilation. I guess the Rebbe was more explicit than I was. I send you my prayerful wishes that the Almighty grant you success to bring up many, many students to be a pride to our people, because they will with pride carry the banner of our faith and tradition, which has come down to us from God at Mount Sinai, with blessing to you and all your family. And with this we conclude today's class.